Hello, scholars. This is the first chapter of our units together. We will not be doing this that often, but every now and then this will supplement note-taking in class. So if you could please, while you're watching this, incorporate this into your notes, pause it if you need, go back if you need. You're the boss. Figure it out. We're just going to be covering a few topics, starting with Chapter 1, the earliest human societies. First, we're going to start with human life before 8000 BCE. So exactly when is actually quite debatable. Not every day, but archaeologists are finding new bones, new fossils that are pushing the date back for when humans were they believe humans first were on the earth. It's believed 6 to 8 million years ago, but again, it's debatable. It keeps getting pushed back, etc. Now, one main thing that I do want you to know, one main distinction between humans and other apes or other creatures is bipedalism, B-I-P-E-D-A-L-S-M, basically walking upright on 2 feet. We have DNA fragments that date back to 4.4 million years ago. That, as of now, indicates the earliest that we know of a creature that walked on 2 feet. You've probably heard of Lucy. Lucy is one of our early ancestors that was found 3.2 million years ago, I'm sorry, it was found in 1974, but her bones date back to 3.2 million years ago in Ethiopia. It is believed when her bones were looked at that she was about 20 when she died. She was about 4 feet tall and about 50 pounds. Again, as scientists and archaeologists look at these different bones, it's constantly being debated, it's constantly being looked at. There is a debate whether or not she walked upright. However, most archaeologists and scientists believe that she did walk upright on 2 feet. Her brain was about the size of an orange. How she died, no one really knows, but that's one great example of one of our ancestors that walked on 2 feet. There were multiple different types of species. The Homo sapiens, obviously you and I, is the one that stayed around. Now, primary sources, that's really important when you study history. A primary source is basically a source that was written by an actual author. So, for example, an actual book that was written by an author. Your textbook is not a primary source, it's a secondary source. A bunch of authors gathered information and put it in that book. There are primary source excerpts in that book. For example, they'll take pieces from, The Art of War or other primary sources and put it in that book. During this time, there are not a lot of primary sources just because we're looking at ancient history, so this gets a little tricky. It'll be a lot easier next year in the Modern World course. At this time, what are primary sources? I would argue objects, artifacts, skeletal remains, even cave painting would classify as a primary source just because there are so few. Next, we'll go into the Paleolithic age. So this is kind of the first age or the Stone Age that we're going to look at. Not spend too much time just so that we can get to a more modern day. The Paleolithic age or the Stone Age, about 70,000 years ago, up until about 8000 BCE. First humans were in Africa and they spread out. How did they spread out? They spread out during the Ice Age. And the Ice Age basically you can think of as just sea levels dropped, land was there, so people were able to follow their herds or follow whatever to different areas. And so humans, Homo sapiens, were leaving Africa and basically were living on every continent except Antarctica. Now, Neanderthals, these are basically, it's the closest human relative. They lived during the Ice Age, typically throughout Eurasia. It's believed they were shorter, they were stockier, they used tools, they buried their dead, which is huge for early human relatives is that there's actual ceremony for burying their deads, meaning that, if you're burying your dead, you had a close relationship with that person. There's an actual ceremony. There's something spiritual. There's something there bringing people together and having some sort of celebration for that person. These people also controlled fire. Now, it is believed that the Neanderthals were unable to make fire. However, they could control it if, let's say, lightning struck or somehow there's fire, and they would control it. They also had nuclear families, and that kind of ties with the burying of their dead, and that there's a mom, there's a dad, there's siblings, there's an extended family, etc. Sometimes you've probably heard of the Neanderthals being called as cavemen, and because these people, because of this ice age, it was very cold, they took shelter in caves. So there you go, cavemen. Now, it's also debated that the Neanderthals interbred with humans, and there is a ton of research if you have the time and if you're interested on did they possibly interbreed with Homo habilis or actual human type creatures. When the Neanderthals disappeared, we don't exactly know why they disappeared, but they did disappear. Fun fact about Neanderthals is that scientists argue that there are some modern ailments like Crohn's disease that can be linked to genetic variants from Neanderthals. So a lot of scientists do argue that in our DNA we do have traces to the Neanderthal people. So Homo habilis, basically, this is the person that came up that was most prevalent during the Stone Age. How did they survive? Basically, they survived, and their advantages were that they used reasoning and they used invention. At this time, their frontal lobe is increasing. They're standing on 2 feet. They're using their hands to manipulate tools. They are mostly vegetarian. Yes, they hunt, of course. However, because that they're still kind of toying with the idea of weapons, their weapons aren't that great. So they're going to rely mostly on things that they can gather. Now, Homo habilis, cavemen, not so much. I would argue that cavemen can be more so associated with Neanderthal. Homo habilis, this strand of human, not so much cavemen, just because, to be honest with you, they're really not living in caves. Caves means there's probably scary bears. I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but it's true. Also, Homo habilis is constantly having to move to find their food, so they're really not really stationary. Like, they're not living in a cave, like knocking stuff over the head. For their diet, they do not grow any food. That's very important. They do not grow any food. We're talking about a nomadic group of people. They use spears, they use bows, they use nets, hooks. They built canoes, they built rafts, they went deeper into the water. So we have a group of organisms that is actually, they've become advanced in that they're being more risky in going up against deer, woolly mammoths, saber-toothed tigers. They have stone spears, so they're actually using their brain to make weapons to go up against these animals. Again, they're not great weapons, but hey, it's a start. As a whole, they would follow their hunt during the summers. They would return to camps during the winter. They would use smoke and fire to preserve meat as a whole. We do call these, you have to see, they're hunters and gatherers. So yes, they would hunt, they would gather, etc. Our our Homo erectus, this is basically our first group of humans that really resembled you and I. Their teeth and jaws are really similar to us. There's a debate on why all of a sudden their jaw starts to change shape, and some scientists will say it was the discovery of fire allowed them to cook their food, so it was easier to chew. However, there are scientists that say this is completely ridiculous. They'll say that the reduction of teeth and jaws due to cooking makes sense, but it's not evolutionary plausible because of the way that we speak would make, and the way we breathe, and the way, like, if we're running, our respiration, that is going to change our jaw more than how we chew. Again, all of this is very debatable. It's kind of a tricky chapter. pretty much everything is debatable. We've just got to go with it. For our, what do we know about Homo erectus? Basically, we have skeletons. The Peking man in China, these are just skeletons that we have found that prove that they're more upright. They stand on 2 feet. Their jaws are more shaped like ours. The brain is getting bigger. Their diet's very similar to the Homo habilis. This is meats, fish. There are no grains, no processed food, no dairy. If you've heard of, the paleo diet, became pretty popular maybe 20 years ago, and that's basically when people say that you should eat what's in nature. You should eat, today it's very fashionable, if you're going to eat, vegetables, you should only eat vegetables that are summer vegetables, as opposed to something that's more popular in the winter. And that's kind of what these people are doing. They don't have pastas or breads because that's processed. As a whole, most kids during this time died before they were 15. Adults rarely lived past the time when they were 40. Scientists have found that a lot of these mummies that they've discovered have hardened arteries, and so then that opens a whole nother, question of possibly did these people not, if their arteries are hardened, which happens to us when we have really bad diets, maybe they didn't have good diets. I don't know. Whatever the case is, that's just something to think about. Now, kind of closing up our discussion is cave paintings. What did they show? Were these people just painting stuff they saw? Did they paint things that that they imagined that were spiritual? And there's a little bit of both. This Pic Mural, this is in France, and in southwestern France, and it's a cave, and in this cave, and I'll show you images in class, but in this cave you see woolly mammoth, you see bison, you see deer. There's also white horses with black spots. Now, why that's something to make note of is that these spotted horses, it's believed that spotted horses did not exist until after humans domesticated horses and started breeding horses. So possibly, who knows? It's debated. It's believed that maybe these horses, or they painted these horses because it was symbolic or it was religious or spiritual. In Lascaux, this is also in France. This is a grotto. There's 15,000 to 17,000-year-old paintings. Again, I'll show you images in class. And this is a cavern. It's about 66 feet wide by 16 feet high. There's about 600 painted animals and symbols. There's about 1,500 engravings. Typically, you will see animals and mythical creatures. There's one human figure, and it appears that it's like a bird-headed man. It is believed, after people have looked at this, after scientists have looked at this and evaluated and analyzed, and archaeologists have, it's believed that this was used as a center for hunting and religious, ceremonies and rites. In 1948, it was open to the public. However, it was closed about 20 years later because the artificial lights and people coming in, it really impacted all of the paintings, and so then it was closed. Now, a replica cave opened in 1983, and apparently it's still open, so you can go check it out. So, thank you for paying attention. I hope this wasn't too horribly boring. Make sure to include this into your notes, and we're going to pick this up on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of this week. Thank you so much. Have a good night.